I'm Maggie Williams, Editor of Reward. I'm here today with Jonathan Watsley, Director of Wealth at Work, to discuss pensions, freedom and choice. So Jonathan, changes being made to the pension system will revolutionise both pensions and retirement. And while it's given employees a lot more freedom and choice, it's also added significant complexity. What are some of the key themes that employees need to think about, whatever their age, to make sure they make the most of the new rules?
I think the key thing is understanding what options are now available to them as part of the new flexibilities. And of course, it's not just about retirement. If someone who's 55 or over can actually withdraw money from their pension and not even retire. So whether it's thinking about the options available because you are retiring, or whether it's about just taking cash and you're not actually retiring, you really need to understand what the pros and cons, the advantages, the disadvantages of taking those actions are, because there are certainly tax implications of that people really need to understand. So I think the first thing there is understand the options. I think the second thing is very much around what is right for you as an individual, because another interesting development as part of the new flexibilities is, for example, if you've got other savings, so you might have ISAs, you might perhaps have company shares, the way you fund retirement, so the way you take income in retirement, isn't necessarily just going to come from your pension, and indeed perhaps it shouldn't do because for tax reasons. So you may want to sort of calibrate those different savings that you have and decide how you're going to take that money. So it has to be very, very, very personalised. And then the third piece is actually how are you going to implement whatever your chosen option is? Are you going to be able to do it through your employer? Are you going to go and get regulated advice and allow an advisor to do it? Or are you going to do it on a DIY basis? And I think the issue with the DIY is historically that's what people have done, when really they only had an annuity to choose from. But we now know that a lot of them made mistakes in terms of the type of annuity they took. So whilst DIY may seem the best option, it's not necessarily the most effective option given the new range of options that people have.
So in order to make sure that employees can make the most of the new freedoms, what do employers need to be aware of?
I think the key thing for the employers now is really looking at what the regulators are saying. And in summary, what they're saying is that employees must be signposted to PensionWise, which is the government service that's been set up to help individuals understand the new flexibilities. But they're also saying that employees need to be signposted towards regulated advice as an option as well. And then they're really underpinning that with risk warnings. Now, depending on which regulator it is, if it's the FCA, then they're being very specific about what some of these risk warnings need to be and the detail that you need to go into. Whereas under the pension regulator, it's a bit more general. Nevertheless, there are risk warnings there. So employers really need to start thinking about actually how are they going to communicate this to their employees, and when they're going to communicate it as well. A lot of companies that we're now working with are saying, well, actually, we need to start communicating this stuff from as a minimum from age 45, and the reason they're choosing 45 is because, of course, people can take pension benefits at age 55. But a lot of these companies within their pension schemes will have lifestyling funds which start 10 years out. So people really need to understand, if they're going into those lifestyling funds, what sort of lifestyling fund are they going into and why are they doing it? And that's not to say they might not change their mind along the way, but it seems a very, very sensible point to start. And I think the other point is really around things like companies that have DB schemes where employees may decide that they want to look at opting out of their DB scheme and going into the DC scheme. So again, they can access the flexibilities. Now, of course, the regulators again are saying that if the value of that pod is more than 30,000, they will need to take regulated advice. So again, the employer needs to start thinking about how they're going to handle these inquiries should they come in.
So being aware of the issues involved in pensions freedom is obviously important for employers. But what do they need to actually do now? How do they make the move from theory to practice?
Well, I think the first thing is understanding what the employee can do within the existing scheme. So some schemes, for example, may already allow within the scheme rules, for example, one withdrawal a year. So if somebody just wants to take a withdrawal out, maybe they're going to carry on working, but they're over 55 and they want to take some cash, then they could do that in the existing scheme rules. For others, that won't be possible. They will say, well, if you want to take money out, basically you have to transfer the whole pot, and then that has often knock-on effects as to, well, if that employee again is going to carry on working but they've just transferred the pot, then are they allowed to carry on contributing? Are they now going into perhaps an auto-enrolment scheme as opposed to perhaps a very generous occupational scheme that they were in before? So there's a lot of practicalities there that the employer needs to be very clear about, and then ensure that the employee in turn is very clear about as well. I think the other thing as well to think about is that any schemes that have tried to implement some of the new flexibilities, and to be fair, there's not many of them, and the ones that have really, or certainly the ones that I've seen, have only done it on a very limited basis. But it is important again to understand that if you are offering something like drawdown within the scheme, you can't do that in isolation. You can't. I've heard some companies talk about it as a default option. Well, you cannot use it as a default option. Employees need to understand all options, so you can't bias towards perhaps what's in the scheme. So again, employers need to really think about what I would call a model retirement process here, and make sure they understand what they're saying to their staff, and they're saying it in the way to comply with the regulations that are coming in.
Many thanks for your insights today, Jonathan.
Thank you.